So what are some consequences of high inflation? Well, there's an erosion of our purchasing power, meaning we can buy less goods and services with the fixed income that we have. This is not great. This means our living standards are reducing. It distorts the allocation of resources. So think of it this way: if you're a producer, you remember we looked at resource allocation, how prices are a factor of determining where businesses, where people allocate their resources to maximize their benefits. Well, if prices are rising purely because of cost and not because of demand, it may alter the allocation of resources. So you might find people are shifting to the production of goods and services, which society generally has no interest for. But because the prices were going up, people thought it was a good idea to start producing those products. Then they realize they have a whole heap of stuff they can't sell. So that's the consequence of high inflation. It distorts the allocation of resources. Lowers savings and lowers investment. So guys, when there's high inflation, generally you will not want to save your money, because the longer you hold on to your money, the more useless it becomes. So you'll try to get rid of it as soon as you get it in order to maximize the benefits of that cash. And of course, it lowers levels of investment, because generally when inflation is high, um, interest rates at banks will be a lot higher. This is because banks are trying to protect their profit margins, and they'll raise the interest rates when inflation is occurring to ensure that their profit percentages stay the same. So when the cost of borrowing money increases, it lowers the level of investments that go on in an economy, and leads over to this: the higher rates of interest. Again, because things cost more to buy, people might try to borrow money in order to continue funding their needs and wants. And if there's a whole heap of people wanting to borrow those limited funds, it'll cause interest rates to rise. Or the second point of view is banks want to protect their profit margins. So let's just say that inflation is currently at 5% and the interest rate is 10%. If inflation increases by 2%, so now it's 7%, do you think banks will continue charging 10% interest on their loans, or will they increase it to 12% to ensure that their profit margins are the same? Well, you would hope they go to 12%. Loss of international competitiveness. So obviously what ends up happening, if we have high rates of inflation, it drives the price of our goods and services up. If the cost of our products are relatively higher than the cost of products overseas, they'll tend to buy other people's products rather than our stuff because of price. So as a result, we're less competitive because we can't offer a good price for our products. Damages business confidence. So guys, if you can't figure out why prices are going up or why prices are going down for products, you won't feel too confident about investing the business's money to further improve the conditions of the organization. So what ends up happening is people don't invest. If they don't invest, it impacts our economy even further. So that's why high inflation can be damaging to business confidence. Okay, so when we look at damaging business confidence, again, because of the distortion in the allocation of resources, businesses may not feel confident about where their future profits will be coming from. And if this is the case, they will reduce the level of investments for the future and just hold on to whatever cash they have to put themselves in the best position, which may cause a negative impact to society and the economy as a whole. Alright, a wage price spiral. So there's a diagram on page 186 that covers this, but essentially what ends up happening is that when inflation increases, so when the prices of goods and services increase, a person's real wages tends to fall. When your real wage tends to fall, you cannot buy the same amount of goods and services that you could have before the inflation occurred. So what do? You demand for an increase in your nominal wage to ensure that you can still buy the same amount of goods and services as you did prior. As a result of this increase in your wages, businesses experience an increase in their cost of production. So what do? They may pass these costs on to the consumer. As a result, they might increase the price of the good and service, and then you're back in the same position as before, where you cannot buy enough goods and services in order to meet the needs and wants that you have. So you demand for a wage increase, and the vicious cycle starts again and again and again. So yeah, please look at page 186 for that diagram. And lastly, damage towards the government goals of full employment and sustainable economic growth. So we got other issues to think about here. High inflation. We just talked about the whole idea of a fall in real wages. Workers demand a higher wage in order to cover their needs and wants of society. This drives cost of production up. What do you think happens when cost of production increases? Does supply shift left or right? Well, it shifts left. So what happens? Output is reduced and prices increase. And what happens when prices increase, guys? Well, people stop buying things because their perceived value, income effect, and what is substitution effect. So what will businesses do to combat that next situation? Well, they will reduce the amount of employees in there. And that's how high inflation might cause unemployment levels to increase. And when the unemployment levels increase, what happens? Well, people don't buy as many goods and services as before, so we don't need to produce as much goods and services as before. So in essence, high levels of inflation causes lower levels of employment, lower levels of economic growth. Voila, they're all linked. So what causes inflation? Well, there are demand and supply factors that could cause this to occur. So going back to our usual demand and supply diagrams, there's two variations that causes prices to increase. One is demand shifting to the right, causing prices to increase. Or two, supply shifts to the left, causing prices to increase. And here are your factors behind them. So demand inflation is essentially when demand shifts to the right, causing prices to rise, quantity increases. Where cost inflation occurs where aggregate supply shifts to the left, causing prices to rise and the quantity outputted to reduce. A more technical term, if you want to sound a bit more fancy, you could call this demand pull inflation. You could call this cost push inflation. Alright guys, so demand side factors to inflation. So anything that shifts to the left is a bad demand factor. Anything that shifts to the right is a good demand factor. It can be the same for inflation. So anything that causes demand to shift to the left will have a negative impact to inflation. Anything that shifts demand to the right will cause a positive impact to inflation. So the factors here are interest rates, real disposable income, the exchange rate, consumer and business confidence, and overseas growth rates. It's the same for full employment, same for GDP. We'll look into more specific details of this on the next PowerPoint. Supply side factors. We've got productivity, cost of production, quantity of factors of production, climatic conditions. So exactly the same as usual. How does it impact inflation? Does it cause supply to shift left or right? We'll determine whether it has a positive or negative impact to inflation also. So that's it, guys. That's the end of chapter 5 in a nutshell. This is the last economic goal done. The next video I'll make will just look into some contemporary examples explaining all these shifts that are occurring in the economy. Have fun.